Dresden, Germany, February 13th, 1945, 10:13 p.m. Through the meat locker's 3-foot steel door, Private Kurt Vonnegut heard the first bombs fall like distant thunder, and in that moment of recognition, that sound he'd been trained to fear, he understood that being locked in a freezer might be the only thing that would save his life. Welcome to the War Maestro Archive, where tonight we descend into the coldest room in a burning city, where 150 starving men shivered at 14 degrees Fahrenheit, while 25,000 souls above them prepared to die in a firestorm that would consume everything except the one place designed to preserve. This is documented history. This is survival by accident. This is the story of how hell came to Dresden and why the safest place in the inferno was a slaughterhouse basement. Kurt's breath made clouds in the darkness. Each exhale hung in the air like a ghost. His fingers had gone numb 20 minutes ago. Now he couldn't feel his toes either. The meat locker beneath Slaughterhouse 5 was designed for hanging beef carcasses, not housing prisoners of war. But here they were, 150 American POWs, captured at the Battle of the Bulge 2 months ago, shipped east in cattle cars marked with nothing worked 12 hours a day in a malt syrup factory, fed watery soup and black bread that tasted like sawdust, starving, freezing, somehow still alive. Private Bernard O'Hare stood next to Kurt in the darkness, both 22 years old, both from the 106th Infantry Division, both so thin their uniforms hung like scarecrow clothes Kurt could count Bernard's ribs through his coat. "You hear that?" Bernard whispered. His voice shook. Kurt heard it. Everyone heard it. The air raid sirens had started at 9:51 p.m. exactly. Their German guards had rushed them down into the basement, shouting in German, panicked into the meat locker, then sealed the door without explanation. Werner Gluck, the youngest guard, had looked terrified, 16 years old with blonde hair and shaking hands. He'd said something in rapid German that Kurt didn't catch, something about staying quiet, staying still. Then he'd slammed the 3-foot steel door shut. The lock clicked. Final. Absolute. Darkness. Cold. The smell of old blood and frozen metal. Above them, Dresden waited. The Florence on the Elbe, the city of Baroque architecture and cultural treasures, home to art museums and opera houses, a city that had never been bombed, not once in 5.5 years of war. The refugees flooding in from the east had believed Dresden was safe, protected, special. That was about to change. The whistling started, high-pitched and growing louder. Kurt recognized the sound from training films, from newsreels, bombs falling through air getting closer. The whistling stopped. The world exploded. The meat locker jumped like a living thing. The floor bucked beneath Kurt's feet. Dust and ice crystals rained from the concrete ceiling. The steel door groaned on its massive hinges. Metal screamed against metal. Somewhere above them, glass shattered in waves. Timber cracked like rifle shots. Kurt grabbed a hanging meat hook to steady himself. The metal was so cold it burned his palm like hot iron. He let go fast. His skin stuck for a second before tearing free. Another explosion. Closer this time, much closer. The emergency lamp flickered, died. The darkness became absolute. Then the lamp sputtered back to life, weak and yellow, casting shadows that jumped and danced. In the dim light, Kurt saw faces around him, hollow cheeks and sunken eyes. Men who'd lost 40 pounds since capture. Men who looked like walking corpses already. Men who'd stopped believing they'd ever see home. "We're gonna freeze to death down here," someone muttered from the darkness. His teeth chattered between words. Bernard's voice came back flat, dead. "Not before we starve." The bombs kept falling. wave after wave. The meat locker shook with each impact. The walls sweated with condensation that immediately froze into intricate ice crystals, like frost flowers blooming on concrete. Kurt's teeth chattered so hard he thought they might crack. His bones felt like ice rods. His lungs burned with each breath of frozen air. The cold was so intense it felt alive, hungry. Above them, 240 RAF Lancaster bombers painted Dresden with fire. High explosive bombs first, 500-pounders, 1,000-pounders. They blew the roofs off buildings, shattered windows for blocks, ripped apart walls, turned solid structures into kindling, ready to burn. Then came the incendiaries, tens of thousands of 4-pound magnesium thermite sticks. They punched through the exposed roofs and ignited at 2,200 degrees Celsius, hot enough to melt steel, hot enough to turn stone into powder. But Kurt didn't know any of that yet. He only knew the cold, the darkness, the sound of a city dying above him, the smell of his own fear sweat freezing on his skin, and the steel door, 3 feet of insulated metal that stood between him and whatever hell was being born outside. The bombing stopped at 10:30 p.m. 15 minutes of hell. Then silence. Kurt stood in the darkness and listened. Not peaceful silence. Wrong silence. The kind that comes after something terrible has happened. The kind that rings in your ears. The POWs waited, shivering, listening. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. They just stood there in the frozen dark and waited for the world to make sense again. Then they heard footsteps on the concrete stairs outside. Heavy boots, stumbling. The lock rattled. Metal scraped metal. The massive steel door groaned open on tortured hinges. Warm air rushed in like a living thing. Number, not warm, hot, dessert hot, furnace hot. Kurt stepped toward the doorway. The temperature difference hit him like a physical wall. After 14 degrees Fahrenheit, the heat felt like standing too close to an open oven. His face started sweating immediately. His frozen fingers burned as blood returned. Werner Gluck stood in the doorway. His face was ash white, his eyes too wide, too staring. His hands shook as he gripped his rifle. The barrel trembled. "Rouse," Werner whispered. "Get out." His voice cracked. "Schnell. Quick." The smell hit Kurt next, sweet and metallic, like copper pennies heated in a pan, like pork roasting, but wrong. The smell was wrong in a way Kurt couldn't name. His stomach turned, his throat tightened. He knew that smell, from basic training, from the films they showed about artillery strikes and flamethrowers, from the lectures on battlefield recovery. Burned meat, burned flesh, human flesh. Werner wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. He kept staring at his boots, at the concrete floor, anywhere but at the POWs. "Zurück in den Keller," he said back to the basement. His voice was breaking. "Bitte, please." But the POWs were already moving up the stairs, drawn by curiosity, by relief at escaping the freezing meat locker, by the basic human need to see, to know, to understand what had happened. Kurt climbed the concrete steps. His legs were stiff from cold. His knees cracked with each step. His breath still made clouds in the air, but the temperature rose with each step upward, from freezing to cold to cool to warm to hot. He reached the main slaughterhouse floor and stopped dead. The ceiling was gone, just gone, blown completely away, timber and tile and metal all erased. Above him, the night sky glowed orange and red. Not stars, not moonlight. Fire, pure fire. Dresden was burning. The entire city, block after block, building after building, street after street. 1,000 separate fires merging into an ocean of flame. A sea of light that turned night into day. Bernard came up beside Kurt, stopped, stared. "Jesus Christ," he breathed. His voice was hollow, empty. Through the missing wall, they could see the city center. the alt-marked square where they'd marched through on their way to the factory, the Frauenkirche Cathedral, with its beautiful Baroque dome now silhouetted against the flames like a paper cutout. And between them and the cathedral, shapes moved through the fire. People, running, stumbling, falling, not getting up. The heat was intense, physical. Kurt's face started to sweat. His frozen uniform steamed. The air shimmered. Everything wavered like a mirage, like the city was melting. Werner's voice came from behind them, broken, childlike. Zurück. Bitte. Zurück in den Keller. Back to the basement, please. Kurt turned to look at the young guard. Werner's eyes were wet, red-rimmed. His rifle hung loose in his hands like he'd forgotten what it was for. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in 30 minutes. We'll suffocate down there, Kurt said. There's no air. Werner finally looked up, met Kurt's eyes for the first time. Better than up here. Kurt didn't understand. The bombing was over. They'd survived. Dresden was burning, yes, but they were alive. They could breathe. They could move. They could think. What could be worse than suffocating in a frozen meat locker? Then he heard it. A new sound cutting through the crackle of flames and distant screams. Rising, wailing, urgent. Air raid sirens. Different tone than before. More frantic. More desperate. Werner's face drained of what little color remained. His rifle clattered to the floor. 9, he whispered. His voice was barely audible. 9, 9, 9. The rumbling started, deep and growing, like distant thunder rolling closer, but not thunder. Engines, hundreds of engines. Werner looked at Kurt with eyes full of absolute horror. They're coming back. 1:21 a.m., February 14th. Kurt was back in the meat locker, back in the cold. The steel door sealed again, locked. But everything had changed. The cold didn't feel safe anymore. It felt like a tomb. Above him, 529 Lancaster bombers approached Dresden, twice the size of the first wave. The bombardiers could already see their target. A glowing coal in the darkness. A city burning like a beacon. The city was already burning. The second wave wasn't here to start fires. It was here to feed them. The first bomb hit like the fist of God. The meat locker jumped. The floor lifted. Kurt slammed into the frozen concrete wall. His head cracked against stone. Stars exploded behind his eyes. Warm blood ran down his neck. Then cold blood, freezing instantly into his collar. Then the world became nothing but explosions. Bomb after bomb after bomb after bomb. No gaps, no pauses. Just continuous thunder. 1,800 tons in 20 minutes. The bombardiers could see Dresden from 90 miles away, a glowing coal visible from the air. They aimed for the center of the light, for the heart of the city. The POWs huddled together, not for warmth anymore, for anchor, for something solid in a world that was shaking itself apart. Kurt grabbed Bernard's arm. Bernard grabbed someone else, a chain of men holding on. Kurt touched the steel door. It was warm, getting warmer. The cold that had burned his hand 2 hours ago was gone, replaced by heat. "Oh God," Bernard said. His voice shook. "Oh Jesus God, we're gonna cook." Outside the meat locker, something changed. The individual explosions merged into one continuous roar, like standing inside a hurricane, like the world itself was screaming, howling. The firestorm had begun. Kurt didn't know the physics, didn't understand the science, but he could feel it. Something massive was being born outside, something beyond bombs, beyond fire. When enough fires burn close enough together, they create their own weather system. The flames heat air, Hot air rises fast. Rising air pulls in oxygen from ground level. More oxygen feeds the flames. Hotter flames heat more air. More air pulls more oxygen. A cycle. Self-sustaining. Self-feeding. Growing exponentially. Wind speeds reached 150 kilometers per hour. Hurricane force. Temperatures hit 1,500 degrees Celsius. Hot enough to melt iron. Hot enough to vaporize water instantly. The fire generated its own lightning, its own thunder, its own insatiable hunger, and it was eating Dresden alive. The firestorm pulled oxygen from everywhere, from streets, from buildings, from basements, from bomb shelters built to be airtight. All across Dresden, thousands of people huddled in basements and cellars and bunkers. They'd felt the heat above. The terror of the first wave, they'd retreated below, into cool darkness, into concrete and steel, into safety. But the firestorm was sucking the air from their lungs. In shelters across the city, people clawed at doors that wouldn't open, at walls that wouldn't break. They gasped, choked. Their lungs pulled in nothing, just vacuum. Margaret Fryer watched people ahead of her simply drop to the ground, one after another. No marks, no wounds, no blood, just falling. Their lungs collapsed by oxygen deprivation, then catching fire where they lay. Lothar Metzger, 9 years old, watched his twin baby sisters disappear in the crush of panicked bodies. Never found again. Not even bodies. Gisela Reichelt watched her grandmother ignite like a match. Jellied petroleum from an incendiary bomb splashed across her dress. 1 second a person, next second a pillar of flame. But in the meat locker, there was air. Old air, stale air, trapped air, filtered through 3 feet of insulated steel and rubber seals. The door designed to keep cold in also kept the vacuum out. The POWs were in a sealed box, a refrigerator, a preservation chamber designed for beef, now preserving men. The slaughterhouse above them was dying, burning, collapsing into itself. The roof caved in with a sound like thunder. The walls cracked. Everything wooden turned to ash in seconds. Everything metal melted and ran like water down walls. But the meat locker held. The foundation was deep. The walls were thick. The door was sealed. "We're cooking," someone sobbed from the darkness. "We're cooking alive in here." Kurt felt it. The walls were hot now. Hot enough to burn if you touched them too long. The air inside was heating up. Slowly, inevitably. Physics couldn't be stopped. But it was heating up from frozen. From minus 10 degrees Celsius. From 14 degrees Fahrenheit. From meat locker cold. They had time. The people in normal basements didn't have time. They had minutes, seconds, then nothing. Kurt closed his eyes. The roar was so loud it felt like it was inside his skull, inside his bones. He prayed to a god he wasn't sure existed anymore. He prayed for cold, for ice, for the thing that had tortured them an hour ago, to save them now. February 14th. Dawn. Werner unlocked the meat locker door. The scrape of metal on metal, the groan of hinges, the rush of hot air and smoke that made them all cough. Kurt stepped out into a different world. The slaughterhouse was a skeleton. The walls still stood, barely, blackened, cracked, but the interior was gutted completely, charred. Everything wooden was gone, vaporized. Everything metal twisted and melted into strange sculptures that looked almost artistic. The smell hit Kurt like a fist to the stomach. That sweet metallic smell from before, stronger now, thick enough to taste on his tongue, coating his throat. He knew what it was, had known since the first wave, but knowing and experiencing were different things. Burned human flesh, roasted pork, the exact same smell. His stomach heaved. He swallowed hard, tasted bile and copper. The guards led the POWs outside, through the ruined slaughterhouse, past melted machinery, up debris-choked stairs, over rubble still hot to the touch into daylight. Dresden didn't exist anymore. Kurt had seen photographs of the moon in National Geographic. Craters and dust and desolation. Dead geology. This looked the same. A moonscape. A Marsscape. Hell itself made visible and walked through. The beautiful Baroque buildings were hollow shells, blackened stone and empty windows like skull eye sockets. The Frauenkirche Cathedral still stood. Its dome was intact but scorched black, soot-stained. It would collapse 2 days later. The heat had weakened the stone from inside, turned it to powder. The streets were clear, eerily clear. Not because they'd been spared, because the firestorm winds were so strong they'd swept everything into piles at the intersections, organized piles. Piles of rubble, piles of furniture, piles of bodies. Kurt saw a hand sticking up from the street. Just a hand, palm up, fingers curled like it was reaching for something. The body beneath it was fused to the melted asphalt, melted into the road by 1,500-degree heat. Part of the street now. He saw shapes that might be people, shrunken, twisted, black as coal, the size of children. They weren't children, they were adults. Full-grown men and women cremated so thoroughly their bones had contracted, their bodies compressed. He saw a man sitting upright against a wall, perfectly preserved, mummified by the instant heat, his mouth open in a scream that would last forever, his eyes open, staring at nothing. Bernard vomited behind him. The sound echoed off dead buildings, off empty stone. Werner walked ahead, eyes forward, one foot in front of the other, not looking left or right, just walking, like a machine, like a wind-up toy. A German officer met them in the Altmarkt square. His uniform was clean, pressed. He must have arrived from somewhere else, somewhere that hadn't burned, somewhere that still existed. He gave orders in rapid German. Werner translated. His voice was flat, empty, mechanical. "We are to clear the bomb shelters," Werner said. Kurt didn't understand. Clear them of what? Werner finally looked at him. His eyes were dead. Absolutely dead. Bodies. We clear them of bodies. The first shelter was in the basement of an apartment building, or what used to be an apartment building. Now just 4 walls and ash and memories. The shelter door was jammed, warped by heat. A German engineer brought cutting equipment, torches. It took 2 hours to get through the steel, 2 hours of sparks and metal screaming. When the door finally opened, air rushed out. Stale air, dead air, air that hadn't moved in hours. Werner pushed a wet handkerchief into Kurt's hand. "Cover your mouth," he said. His voice was gentle, almost kind. Kurt tied it around his face. The cloth was cold. Damp. It helped. Not much, but some. He descended into darkness with a flashlight in his shaking hand. The shelter was designed for 200 people, built by German engineering. Concrete walls 2 feet thick, concrete ceiling, steel reinforced, built to withstand direct hits, built to protect. It had failed, in a way no one had imagined. Kurt's flashlight beam cut through the darkness. He saw them immediately, rows and rows of people, sitting, standing, leaning against walls arranged like they were waiting for a train, mothers with children in their laps, fathers with arms around families, old men and women holding hands, all grouped together, all dead, not burned, not crushed, not marked at all, no wounds, no blood, just empty, like someone had reached in and pulled out whatever made them alive, whatever made them human. Their faces were peaceful, blue-gray, serene. Some looked like they were sleeping. Some looked like they were waiting patiently for something that never came. Kurt counted. 73 bodies in the first shelter. The firestorm had taken the oxygen, sucked it right out of the sealed room like a vacuum pump. They'd suffocated without a wound, without violence, without a sound, just sat there quietly as the air disappeared and their lungs pulled in nothing. A German soldier handed Kurt a cart, wooden, with metal wheels, pointed at the bodies. The meaning was clear. No words needed. Kurt started to work. He lifted a woman. She was light, too light, like a bird made of paper. Her skin was cool, not cold like the meat locker, just cool, room temperature. The handkerchief over Kurt's mouth did nothing. The smell was everywhere, in his nose, his throat, his lungs. He placed her on the cart, gently, then went back for the next one. An old man with white hair, then a child, a girl maybe 7 years old. She wore a blue dress with white flowers. The flowers looked hand-embroidered. Kurt's mind started to go somewhere else, somewhere safe, somewhere that wasn't here. A psychological defense mechanism. He moved mechanically. Lift, carry, place, return. Lift, carry, place, return. A rhythm, a pattern, empty of thought. They found 21 more shelters that day. All the same, all full, all suffocated, all peaceful, all dead. Bernard stopped talking after the third shelter. Just worked in silence, his face blank, his eyes empty, like the people they were carrying, like he was dead too. Werner didn't help with the bodies, just stood at the entrance to each shelter, looking at nothing. Sometimes his lips moved. Kurt thought he might be praying or counting, or saying names. By the fourth shelter, Kurt stopped counting bodies. The numbers didn't matter, didn't mean anything, just weight to be moved, objects to be transported from one place to another. By the seventh shelter, he stopped seeing faces, just shapes, forms, things that used to be people but weren't anymore. Mass, weight, cargo. That night, they returned to the meat locker. It was their barracks now. The slaughterhouse above was too damaged, unsafe, so they slept in the freezer. In the cold that had saved them, in the cold that now felt like punishment. Kurt lay on the concrete floor, stared at the ceiling, at the meat hooks still hanging there, still swaying slightly. He tried to remember his mother's face, couldn't. Tried to remember his father's voice, couldn't. Tried to remember his sister's laugh. Nothing. All he could see were the rows of bodies, the peaceful faces, the blue-gray skin, the children in their mother's arms, the families grouped together, the neat organization of death. All he could hear was silence, the terrible silence of a sealed room, with no air, the sound of nothing. Bernard whispered from the darkness. "How many do you think died?" Kurt didn't answer, didn't want to think about it, didn't want to add up the numbers, didn't want to make it real. "Thousands," Bernard said. His voice was hollow. "Tens of thousands, maybe more." Kurt closed his eyes, felt the cold seeping into his bones. The same cold that had kept him alive while thousands suffocated or burned. The same cold that had preserved him like meat while people died in their approved shelters. Why had the meat locker saved them? Why had 3 feet of steel and a sealed door meant life for 150 prisoners, while 200-person bomb shelters became tombs? Why had the place designed for animals protected humans, while the places designed for humans killed them? There was no answer. Just random chance. Just physics and timing and dumb luck. Just being in the wrong place that turned out to be the right place. The cold had preserved them. Like meat. Like cargo. Like things instead of people. And everyone else had died. February 14th, noon. The survivors looked up at the sky with dead eyes, hollow eyes, eyes that had seen too much. There was nothing left to hit, nothing left to burn, just ash and rubble and corpses. Then they heard the engines. American engines. Familiar engines. 316 American B-17 Flying Fortresses. The 8th Air Force. The same planes Kurt had watched in newsreels, had cheered for in training. His own country's planes. They were aiming for the railway yards, military targets, strategic infrastructure, legitimate targets according to the rules of war. But the smoke from fires still burning rose 15,000 feet into the air, a column of black, visible for 100 miles. The bombardiers couldn't see through it, couldn't see the ground, couldn't see anything but smoke. They dropped their bombs anyway, on instruments, on coordinates, on guesswork. Kurt was in the alt-marked square, loading bodies onto carts. His hands were numb, his back ached, his mind was empty. He heard the whistling, that sound, that terrible sound. He looked up, saw the bombs falling through smoke like rain. "Down!" someone screamed. American voice, American accent. Kurt dove behind rubble, a pile of bricks that used to be someone's home. The ground erupted 20 feet away. The shockwave hit him like a physical punch. His ears popped. His vision went white. Debris rained down, stone and metal and ash and dust. When the world stopped moving, he stood up, coughed, looked around through the dust cloud. Someone was missing, a POW who'd been standing right there loading bodies, just gone, erased, vaporized, not even blood, just absence. Some bombs hit the rail yards, twisted the tracks. Some hit the suburbs, killed more refugees. Some hit the columns of people still streaming out of the city, still trying to escape, still hoping. Some hit the men clearing bodies, Allied prisoners, American soldiers, killed by American bombs. The raid lasted 14 minutes. 14 minutes of more death, more destruction, more pointless waste. When it was over, Kurt returned to work. There were more bodies now, fresh ones, still warm. Some wore American uniforms. Some wore prisoner rags. Some wore German Guard uniforms. Werner sat on a pile of rubble, his rifle beside him, his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking, sobbing. The 16-year-old guard crying like a child. Kurt kept working. Lift, carry, place, return, the rhythm, the pattern, the empty motion. He didn't feel anything anymore. Couldn't feel anything. His capacity for horror was full, overflowing, spilling out, leaving him empty. Just work, just motion, just survival. Nothing else. May 1945. 3 months later. The Red Army liberated Dresden. Soviet soldiers found the POWs still working, still clearing bodies, still going through the motions. They shipped the Americans west through the ruins, through Germany, to Allied lines, to freedom. Kurt ended up at Camp Lucky Strike in France, a repatriation center near Le Havre. Clean bunks, hot food, safety, things that felt unreal, dreamlike. He wrote a letter to his father, to the man he could barely remember, to a life that felt like someone else's story. On about February 14th, the Americans came over, followed by the RAF. Their combined labors killed 250,000 people in 24 hours and destroyed all of Dresden, possibly the world's most beautiful city. But not me. He wrote those words, but not me, 7 times in the letter. 7 times. Once for each day of clearing bodies. Once for each circle of his personal hell. But not me. 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 The survivor's refrain. The guilt that never leaves. The question with no answer. Why? Why was he in the one place cold enough to survive the heat? Why was he in the one room sealed enough to survive the suffocation? Why was he locked in a meat locker while families died in bomb shelters? Why did 150 starving prisoners live when 25,000 civilians died? What made his life worth more than theirs? What made a meat locker safer than a bunker? There was no answer. Just physics. Just chance. Just being in the wrong place that became the right place. Kurt wouldn't talk about Dresden for 20 years. Couldn't talk about it. When reporters asked, he changed the subject. When his wife asked, he went silent. When his children asked, he told them stories about other things. When he finally did write about it, he wrote it as science fiction, as time travel, as aliens and other planets, as anything but the simple, horrible, documented truth. Because the truth was unbearable. The truth was random. The truth was that survival meant nothing, proved nothing, meant nothing except being in the right place at the right time by pure accident. The safest place in hell was a freezer, a slaughterhouse basement, a room designed for dead animals. The coldest place in the city became its only sanctuary, and everyone else burned. 25,000 people, mothers and children, families and refugees, old men and young women, people in approved shelters, people following the rules, people doing everything right, all dead, while Kurt lived, while 150 prisoners lived, while the people locked in the meat locker lived. So it goes. That's what he'd write, years later, in his novel, his masterpiece, his attempt to make sense of the senseless. So it goes. So it goes. So it goes. The arbitrary cruelty of survival, the meaningless luck of death, the random horror of war. So it goes. If this tale from the War Maestro Archive left you cold, check the temperature around you. Is it preservation or something else? Subscribe to witness more stories where survival defied all logic. Hit that notification bell before the sirens start, like this video, if you understand that sometimes the safest place is the last place you choose to be. Share this story with those who know that history's darkest moments aren't always written by the victors. Sometimes they're written by the survivors who never understood why they lived. Leave a comment below. What would you have done in that meat locker? Would you have stayed in the cold or risked the heat above? Remember, some doors were meant to stay sealed. Some cold was meant to save you. So it goes.